Сайн байцгаана уу хүн үзэгчдээ. Өнөөдөр манай de facto нэвтрүүлгийн зочноор олон улсын байгууллагын хамгаалах Nature Conservancy гэж байгууллагын гадаад харилцаа хариуцсан захирал хадагтай Lynn Scarlett оролцож байна.
Lynn Scarlett нь Nature Conservancy байгууллагын гадаад харилцаа хариуцсан дэд ерөнхийлөгч бөгөөд мөн уур амьсгалын стратегийн багийг тэргүүлдэхийн хувьд Америкийн нэгдсэн улсад болон Nature Conservancy байгууллагын үйл ажиллагаа явуулдаг дэлхийн 72 орнд хэрэгжүүлэх бодлогыг удирдан чиглүүлдэг. Тэрээр Америкийн нэгдсэн улсын байгаль орчны яамны үйл ажиллагаа хариуцсан дэд сайдаар ажиллаж байсан бөгөөд энэ хугацаанд тус яамны байгаль хамгааллын хамтын ажиллагааны ажлын хэсэг болон хамгийн анхны уур амьсгалын өөрчлөлтийн ажлын хэсгийг тус ахалж байв. Уур амьсгалын өөрчлөлтөд дасан зохицох, экосистемийн үйлчилгээ, ландшафтын түвшний байгаль хамгаалал, шинжлэх ухаан ба шийдвэр гаргах гэсэн олон төрлийн сэдвээр биедан болон хамтарсан нийтлэлүүд гаргасан байна. Lynn бакалавр болон магистрийн зэрэгээ Америкийн нэгдсэн улсын Калифорни их сургуульд улс төр судлалаар хамгаалсан бөгөөд уг сургуультай докторийн зэрэгийг улс төр судлал эдийн засгаар горилсон.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to Mongolia.
Thank you very much.
You have very important sessions in Mongolia.
Yes.
Yeah, what is that about?
Well, the Nature Conservancy has worked in Mongolia now for 10 years, and we are celebrating our 10th anniversary of conservation success and working with partners, businesses, and others for a sustainable future.
You said 10 years of success. Please tell us about the success.
The Nature Conservancy has started its work in Mongolia recognizing this is the 19th largest country in the world.
Okay.
It has some of the most intact grasslands in the world, at the same time facing lots of development. And that gives the Conservancy and Mongolia a chance to really look to the future and pioneer bringing environment and economy together and helping development, but at the same time doing that well and right to preserve the grasslands.
It happened at the time when this country was the most developing, with very highest rates, in particular early 2010s. But now but still it's at the level of 5-6. And this is very much mining country. And it's yes, huge. So how is that balancing that?
Yeah, well, we see environment and economy and the mining economy as being able to work together, but the main underpinning of that is to do large-scale spatial planning. So we worked with the government of Mongolia to help map out the whole country, understand where there are important biological species, water, other important assets, and then with that understand what places to try and set aside as protected areas, and then which places were more suitable for development, working with development and miners together then to site their facilities in a way that avoids the most important places.
I understand you have already successfully completed that planning.
Yes.
And it is huge work. As you said, it's a large country. How you have completed that?
Yes, well, the Nature Conservancy benefited from all the work of so many other scientists and other partners. So there was already quite a lot of information on species, on water, a lot of information on where the mining resources were. What we did was to work with those partners and really for the first time ever put that all together, integrate all that into one big map. So we were able to work quickly because we worked with partners, with universities, with others to build that database.
And what is the particular importance of that database and that one map?
It's incredibly important because if you look to places like the United States, 100 years ago, we had no maps like that, and we went about mining and doing that work without any attention to where there were important grasslands or places of great species diversity. And so now, in places like the United States, we're having to clean all that up and try to undo our mistakes. Mongolia starts fresh with these great grasslands, and the maps help guide where are places where one can do the mining with less impact, how can one avoid critical places where there are species, where there's important water. So that's why the mapping is so important. And Mongolia and the government have helped lead the way, creating protected areas. Mongolia is a leader in the world. 17% of Mongolian lands now protected areas, and that's happened alongside mining. So development is occurring, protected areas also being established.
Yet 5% of Mongolia is being used for mining, I think. 70% of land is protected. Does protected mean that there is no mining?
So it depends. You have two kinds of protected areas in Mongolia. There are national protected areas. There are local protected areas. The local ones are set up for a certain period of time, and then they can be reevaluated in terms of what land uses will occur. Of course, also those protected areas do allow for sustainable grazing as well, for example. So they're designed to work with development, but do it in a way that is sustainable.
You have been Chief Executive Officer of such a large organization in the US as a Department of Interior, right? And you are the person who have gone through all this conflicts usually happening between industry, environment, etc. So what is the most controversial and most difficult case was during your career?
Well, there are a lot. Yeah, the Department of the Interior manages 20% of the United States.
Wow.
And I used to say when I was at the Interior Department, throw a dart on the map and you find controversy. But many of the issues are similar to Mongolia. So Wyoming, for example, went through a period of major energy development. And our challenge at the Department of the Interior was to ask, how can we do that better than we did 50 years ago, 100 years ago? So the Department of the Interior, working with the private sector, working with conservation organizations, did embark on large-scale spatial planning, very similar to the vision here in Mongolia. How can we look big picture? How can we cluster development, avoid the really sensitive areas? And we find that by doing that, we can reduce conflict, have a place for conservation, have development, and the economic opportunities. But the key to success is two things, good science and good collaboration.
You said good science and good collaboration. Speaking about that, how is the current Mongolian government is using the map you have made in the process of aggressive expansion of Mongolian mining industry?
Yeah, so the Mongolian government has looked at that map and sort of a national conservation blueprint, and with that helped to inform where the protected areas would go, which the Mongolian government then makes the final decisions about. And then, once one has those protected areas, then that opens up opportunity to say, okay, here's where we can have mining development. We, the Nature Conservancy, also have a non-traditional approach to conservation. So many organizations in conservation focus just on conservation, just on conservation partners. We reached out to the mining industry, and we have partnered with them and said, okay, once we identify the places that are suitable for mining, how can we also work with you in your practices to reduce your environmental footprint? How can we work with you to, as you develop, also invest in and kind of offset those impacts? So those non-traditional partners bring environment and economy and people, communities together.
There are certain conflicts happening in the country. For example, there was a law we called, long-named law, which is forbidding mining in the water basin. And when the question comes, water or gold, people of course prefer water, like you did during after gold fever in Colorado, in California, right? Still that law is not being completely implemented. And still there are several cases, many cases where not every mining company is following that standard, or to help to reduce, as you said, the environmental footprint. What would be your advice? There is also we call it, probably you also aware about the ninja mining, artisanal mining.
Yes.
So what would be the best to enforce our laws here in this regard?
You know, it's complicated, it's difficult. I think there are two key points. One, when we look, let's say, to the United States experience, when we embarked on the gold rush 150 years ago, we paid no attention to water and water quality. The result of that is we have had to spend billions of dollars in cleanup. When people realize water is life, it's better to try and sustain that water quality now rather than face degradation and then those tremendous costs in the future. So one point is to help people not look just to the now, but see that the future matters. And the future matters not only for environment, but indeed for the economy itself. So that's one point. But the other is to understand in implementing the law that there are ways to protect the water and do so cost effectively. So we work with companies to find those practices that still allow development, still allow profitability, but protect the water. I think the challenge is what you stated. Small companies, artisanal companies that maybe don't have all the resources. And so there, I think, combination of partnering, providing technical expertise, assisting in that development can be an important tool to be sure the law is actually implemented.
That's provided that they are kind of legal people with, you see, my point is we have about 8,000 formally registered as ninja miners. But in reality we have 30,000 of them all around the country. Where were they hear about gold discovery? They are there immediately. And more than that, they're now trying to be protecting the nature, but actually many of them, in many cases, they're trying to kick them out, the officially who has a licensed company. Then they dig themselves, which will have devastating consequences afterwards. So we are just at that path here today in Mongolia to convince how to develop the economy and yet the environment to be more protected. So So what is your expectation? What do you see the work of the Nature Conservancy in Mongolia, say from 5 years from now?
Yeah, a really important part of the work, well, there's several things. One, of course, National Conservation Blueprint. Mongolia has set even bigger goals for protected areas, 30% goal. So working with the Mongolian government, with the people of Mongolia to achieve that goal. But a second relates, I think, to implementation and making sure the laws are followed, and that is community engagement. Really, ultimately, one needs all the people of Mongolia and those who depend on those grasslands to have some role in community-based management, in being able to express their voices as mining development occurs. So we are working on how to do that, on capacity building, on shared learning, on best practices. It's not a magic pill. It takes time, but we think those are ingredients of progress.
I know in the US, people approach to their environment differently. I'm very pleased to know people really approaching it like it's their own property, everything. How important is the education of children? And do you somehow require schools teach about their culture?
Well, of course, education and children are incredibly important because they are the future. So bringing environmental education into the classroom is important. The Nature Conservancy works with children. We bring them out to our sites. We get them involved. We get them involved in science, actually doing measurements, actually helping in what we call citizen science, so that the environment is not just a concept in a book, but so that it feels real and they understand it. So that's important, but of course, education alone can't do the trick. You need the laws, you need their implementation, you need the science to help. It all goes together.
You have do you have education law?
One that requires environmental education?
Yes.
No, not nationally. So,
but each state has own.
Each state has its own. Each state guides education. So many states have curricula on environment, but it's highly variable by state.
However, how can get the community approaching to this children's education, you call citizens education, in such a way that they feel like obligatory, they think it must be done. How change that approach?
So take an example in the United States, which has to do with waste. We're a big country with a lot of people.
Yes.
And we have faced a situation of so much trash all going to landfills. And so 20, 30 years ago, there was a big focus on bringing education about recycling, about waste reduction into the classroom. And children have really helped lead the way, telling their parents, no, don't throw that trash away, we should recycle. That's one example, but it has been quite successful. So we've turned from a country really focused on throwing things away to instead recycling stuff.
Indeed. Late 90s, you started to have selections. Every household is kind of now voluntarily and willingly to sort out all these things and put the particular color bottles, glasses, separate colors. And I think that culture is now set very much all around the US, right?
Yes, it is.
What was the consequences of that? I mean, in the larger term, is it kind of obviously waste management, processing industry, education, knowledge, etc. What are other consequences?
Well, you know, other consequences is manufacturers really changed packaging. So we used to have, for example, big packaging with lots of extra materials, and many manufacturers reduced packaging to a minimum. For example, that's one thing. Some changed the materials that they're using so that the materials are more recyclable than what they had been using. So the whole system of waste management and moving towards recycling and thinking about waste reduction percolated throughout the economy.
And my question is around forestry.
Yes.
And the forest. And your Department of Interior, by the way, Department of Interior is responsible for the restoration of the environment or something else?
It's responsible for so many things. So the Department of the Interior has all the national parks, all the wildlife refuges, all of what we call our public multiple use lands for energy and mining, but also manages all the big dams. So hydropower, the Great Hoover Dam. We have many forests and manage forests and fire.
How many
we
total?
manage offshore oil and gas development.
Oh, do you?
Yes.
Offshore, because it's water basin, right? Water management. How many total people work there?
70,000.
70,000. And you were in charge of these people, huh?
Yes.
Executive director.
Yes.
And these 70,000 people must have their own uniform, this very impressive uniform.
The National Park Service has its own uniform.
Yes.
Our Fish and Wildlife Service has its uniform, but not everybody has a uniform.
Not the officers, okay. So back to the questions about the forestry. Here in Mongolia, when we talk about saving the forest, protecting, we mostly understand don't touch it. And yet in your country, they not only touch it, they kind of use its source of also a farming, source of also wooden manufacturing, right? How this combination works?
Yeah, you know, it's a very similar story to the mining story. So in the past, going back 50, 100 years, the United States managed forests in a way that didn't take into account the future and sustainability, and so chopped everything down. But as time went on, realized that that damaged the watersheds, it really imperiled the long-term health of forests. And so many forests now, we have sustainable practices where you, yes, still have timber harvest, but selectively, and you keep certain stands of forests so that it's sustainable over time. It's really important for two reasons now. One is we now have a better understanding how important forests are for watershed protection, to prevent erosion, prevent erosion that results in sediment going into water supplies. But secondly, climate change. We realize forests absorb carbon dioxide. They are the lungs of the earth, that they can contribute to reducing or addressing the effects of climate change. So we need to find ways to keep them healthy, but we see that as actually requiring some use of the forest, because if you can get some income from the forest, then you want to invest back in the forest. So they go together.
And yet the developed countries are doing very well, and the developing countries are still more, they use more damaging rather than using and giving it back to the forest. There is an issue of, there is a goal, Sustainable Development Goal 2030. You were a part of this, creating all these documents, negotiating worldwide. Today, 2018, how do you see the program?
You know, the Sustainable Development Goals globally set aspirations, and the results are sort of a mixed bag. So some goals are being achieved. So, for example, goals of protected areas, there's been progress, and Mongolia has been a leader in that. Other goals, for example, water quality, sanitation, things like that, there's still a lot more work to do.
Water quality. And yet, now many countries signed an agreement in Paris, they agreed to go ahead, and your country had not. What happened?
Yeah, you know, next week in California, there is a big global climate summit. And the summit was initiated after the Trump administration announced that it was pulling out of the Paris Agreement. And a lot of people stood up and said, we're still in. Regardless of the Trump administration, companies, states, cities, other governments are still committed. And so while we hope at the Nature Conservancy that the U.S. gets back into the climate solution nationally, we are right now really focusing on states and cities and the private sector who have a will to act. And the good news is there's a lot going on. 16 states in the United States looked at the Trump announcement and said, well, we're still committed. We still have climate goals.
Including
Hundreds
California?
of cities. California is one of them, yep.
California is the largest economy, which can even survive, only state which can survive without federal networking. But it's very important. 16 American states are like, you know, whole Europe, or more than whole Europe. So that spirit is on. That spirit is on. Nice to hear that. The final question is why you have decided to be so close to the Natural Conservancy? What is that intrinsic mover inside?
You know, what I love about the Nature Conservancy after a long history in conservation and government is the focus of the Conservancy on three things. Science, that good action flows from knowledge. The second is partnerships and community engagement. And the third is a focus on results, working with everybody, working with companies, with farmers, with ranchers, with the fishing community, that durable solutions are solutions that bring economy, community, and environment all together. So I love that about the Nature Conservancy.
That's the way I think we want to go ahead. Not easy. And the job your organization doing is in Mongolia is very appreciated. And I think it's setting a certain standard to go in that way, in a triple combination way, as you said.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Lynn.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. За, хүн түзэгчтэй өнөөдөр манай de facto нэвтрүүлгийн зочноор Америк олон улсын байгууллагын хамгаалах их томоохон байгууллага байдаг. The Nature Conservancy. Энэ байгууллагын гадаад харилцаа эрхэлсэн захиралтай ярилцлаа. Их баярлалаа.